This is the Volvo XC60. This is a 2019 Volvo XC60 in the T6 R Design package. But this is not just any Volvo XC60 in the T6 all-wheel drive R Design package. This is my new daily driver. Or correction, this has been my new daily driver for the last 6,500 miles, or since I bought it around September time when my TL unfortunately passed away. So for that, I want to take you guys through just some of why I bought the car, how it's been, how the ownership experience has been, and as Doug DeMiro would say, some of the quirks and features. So obviously one of the, usual like de facto things that people will refer to is here we've got Thor's hammer headlights, which, it's definitely a good design and coming from a 2008 Acura TL Type S, but spending a lot of time driving a 2010 Toyota Tacoma, as well as a 2012 and a 2019 Subaru Outback. I will say having great headlights makes a difference. These are full LED. There is adaptive headlights for steering where it actually illuminates this light and this light down here when you're doing turns, and it only actuates during turns. That's a very good thing. But some of the things that are features that I definitely appreciate are nice to have. This does have full front parking sensors, as well as it does have sensors on the side, as well as sensors in the rear. One of the optional packages that I don't have, unfortunately, is I don't have the front camera. I also don't have adaptive cruise, which kind of sucks. However, this does have forward collision warning, forward collision detection, pedestrian detection, as well as blind spot monitoring, lane keep assist, and a lot of different benefits. But we'll take you guys into some of the quirks and features from the side. So, one of my least favorite aspects of this car actually is, or one of the things that has annoyed me the most, is actually when you open the door seals. I don't know what Volvo engineering was thinking when they actually did this, but if we take you guys off of the tripod here, get you guys brought on in. So if we take you guys around the door sills, actually, as you can see here, I've actually had to apply some of additional silicone gasketing, just because I don't know what the Swedish engineers were thinking, but they were put together with some rather crappy, just double-sided tape. And now I know what you're saying. Oh, maybe it was like the previous owner, because I did buy this as the second owner, I believe. But on my passenger side rear, the seal was pretty much all fallen off. So when I was servicing it at a Volvo dealership, I actually had them go ahead and replace the entire seal, and it's done with a crappy double-sided tape that appears to be attached to the seal itself when it's installed, and it just fails pretty easily. So now most of these are touched up with additional silicone adhesive, and I have more just in case this issue kind of persists. But if we take you guys into kind of the cabin area here, one of the nicer parts that comes with the T6, comes with the R Design packaging, is actually the Alcantara inserts into the Volvo's packaging. So, if we take you guys into the interior of the vehicle here, there are some things that might stick out or stand out. So if we go to one of the people's biggest gripes, we have a gigantic center stack and center screen. We have a very sparse, minimalistic wheel, and there's just not a lot of buttons overall in the interior. But we'll cover a lot more of that when it comes to the driving portion and ownership portion. We do have aluminum top rails on the top of the vehicle, which are a pro and a con. It's a con because they oxidize a little bit. They collect a lot more contaminants than paint or plastic ones, and the previous owner, I don't know what they did, but they absolutely chewed in to my aluminum top rail and inserts. So I don't know if the camera will pick this up that well, but that is just chewed into and disgusting. Another fun quirk or feature of the vehicle is, if you're looking at it, one, we have the windshield wipers that kind of inset into the hood and are kind of covered within the cowl area. Also, you may notice that there are no windshield washer dispensers. Those are built into heated windshield wipers. That's going to be expensive if they ever break for the heating element or the spray element. This side, one of the weird quirks or features of the Volvo XC60 is, as you can see here, there are no heating lines, but if we take a look into the rear, there is vents running to defrost the rear windows. I have not seen that on a lot of other vehicles, as well as instead of the vents being in the center console portion, they are instead built right into the doors, or to the door sill area. However, I know what you're saying. Why did you call out the rear window on the passenger side? Because if we look onto the rear window of the driver's side, you can faintly see defrost lines for some reason. Let's see if those are more present from the inside. They definitely are. But there are defroster lines as well as having the vent. Then this does have manual folding, or this does have folding rear seats, as well as folding rear headrest that you can actuate from the center screen. But in terms of additional quirks and features, if we open up the rear hatch here, we do have this nice little metal skid plate just for when you're loading, unloading stuff. We do have the buttons to go ahead and drop the rear seats, which may or may not be visible. There they are. We have some thoughtful holders in here in the side built in. We have power in the rear, as well as we have additional just holders for bags or like another small item. Then if we go underneath my rear hatch or rear storage here, we do have a donut spare, which underneath this is located the battery, unfortunately. So it is kind of unfortunate placement for the battery, just because for battery testing or other stuff, you know, you do kind of have to go under there. This does have a kick to close rear tailgate if it wants to actuate. It does not want to actuate right now, but it also does have a key one, and it opens and closes really quickly, which definitely seems weird, but it's a little cold outside. There's a lot more quirks and features on the inside, but we are going to cover that on the driving portion. So we'll take you guys into the cabin. Welcome to the interior portion of the Volvo XC60 ownership review, some of the quirks and features of it. So one of the fun things that I do appreciate is instead of like a push button start, something normal, we just have this little center twisty knob. It is definitely fun, but like a throwback to my TL, we have a sliding cup holder cover, which, you know, did break on the TL, but this one appears to actually have fabric underlays underneath it, instead of the TLs being more of a spiny shaped plastic that connects it, where it would break in between the spines. I do have hope that the fabric backing potentially should hopefully be better for extended use and extended bending. So maybe that was a well thought out lesson. Yeah, so it's a rather minimalist interior, if I do have to say so, of which, you know, the gear standard is just the gear selector is just a normal gear selector. There's nothing really to write home about with that one. It's not like the newer Acuras where it's like a push button selector. It's not like the Genesis where it's a cool ball that just rotates out. Instead, it is just a standard gear selector. And now I know that they are a little more unique or different for the newer Volvo XC60s, XC90s, XC40s, where it's like a weird little kind of joystick thing. However, I did have one as a loaner vehicle while this was down for maintenance, and it honestly wasn't that bad. I think that there was a lot of similarities in between the two, and we are just taking this road slow currently at the moment because I am in the mountains of Colorado, where I'm in Golden, Colorado, just in some of the trails and some of the mountain roads. So it is a narrow road with snow and ice on the ground, and I'm sharing the road of other vehicles incoming where it's one lane. but it's kind of a tight one lane and one lane. So just to be cautious. And then obviously speeds will pick up a little more throughout the review. But through the last 6,500 miles of ownership, there have been a few things to stand out for me. So when it comes to my history of owning cars, my first car growing up was a 2002 Acura RSX, followed by a 2008 Acura TL Type S. So I don't know if you're following the trend here necessarily, but I drove a lot of Acuras growing up, and I owned 2 Acuras growing up. So when I had my 2008 Acura TL get totaled out by insurance due to a hailstorm, there was a few vehicles that were in the running. I looked at, because I had just moved to Colorado from Wisconsin, and I'm working a full-time job that requires me to be in person, some of the vehicle criteria that I wanted was all-wheel drive with enough ground clearance to get me into work for the 4 or 5 days a week that I have to be at work, just because if it does snow or if there's rain or other issues, I need to be able to get into work. So coming from a lower 2008 TL Type S, it was good in some weather, but when it came to snowstorms or too much snow, it just could not cut the job. And that's not a flaw of the vehicle, it's just not something that it was designed to do. So I looked at the Acura RDX, the Acura MDX, I looked at 4Runners, Tacomas, I looked at the Volvo XC40, XC60, the Jeep Grand Cherokee, and a few other vehicles. And some of the criteria that I was looking for when I was in the process of buying a vehicle and doing that search was moving to Denver, Colorado. I kind of noticed that a lot of the drivers on the road were pretty terrible or pretty concerning. And, they're not driving like small cars here. We're talking like larger trucks, larger vehicles. Or if I was in something low or I was in something slightly older, that I don't necessarily know how safe that would be for me as the driver. So I wanted something with a higher safety rating as well as additional safety features like blind spot monitoring, just because, it's a good feature to have. Lane keep assist, it's good to have during road trips, other events, as well as like forward collision detection and just some other like general safety features that make it not only safer for me on the road, but other drivers. One of the ones that I did want to have necessarily was going to be adaptive cruise control, of which the previous owner did not opt as a package for this car, which also got rid of me having pilot assist, which is some additional safety features on the vehicle. I still have cruise control, but when I was looking at the vehicle, I thought that it had adaptive cruise control because it has the buttons. I think Volvo just puts in the buttons regardless instead of putting in blanks, and that was definitely a miss on my portion for not checking that out and investigating that prior to purchasing the vehicle. So just a little history for how I bought the vehicle and when I bought the vehicle. So my prior car had been totaled out by insurance due to a hailstorm, and I was living in Colorado at the time. I have family in St. Louis, so I was looking within the 2 vicinities of those locations, just because I had family to where I could fly, have family pick me up, and then I could drive the car back, or I could buy one locally. The car market was definitely not ideal at the time, and looking at the price comparisons between the two, it was costing me about 20% more to buy a car in Denver or within like the Colorado area. I'm not necessarily sure why that was or why that is, but it was looking at like $26,000 for roughly the same mileage, same condition vehicles in St. Louis, and then 30s in the state of Colorado. So I ended up really leaning in towards buying a vehicle within the area of the Midwest. And that's how I ended up not seeing this car in person technically before I bought it. But if I had owned so many Acuras prior to this one, why would I switch teams or switch my sides for this one? So being an engineer and someone that wants to just really develop for themselves, I wanted to make sure I wasn't getting any bias in my just general life. So while I'm still young and still figuring stuff out, I wanted to buy a vehicle that was going to be out of the norm of what I would buy, but still checked off a lot of the boxes. It still had it had a lot of technology. It had a lot of good technology. It was reviewed relatively well, and some of the reviews that I saw online actually made me want to buy the vehicle more. So it's definitely a weird one, but I believe it was a Car and Driver article where they talked about the suspension being stiff and rough compared to a lot of the vehicles within the class. And coming from a 2008 Acura TL Type S, as well as the rental vehicle once that was picked up that insurance had provided to me was a Toyota Highlander, and the suspension was ungodly plush, and I feel like it wasn't properly tuned or dampened. So there would be a lot of reverberation after bumps or just other items, and maybe because the vehicle was designed to be more of a family hauler or have a lot more stuff in it. So I wasn't meeting the weight requirements in the vehicle to properly have the suspension react like they had engineered it to. So when I saw that there was articles saying that the suspension is stiff or it handles rough and it's just tight all around, it was definitely something that stuck out to me as, hey, this might be a good middle step, just because I like my suspension to be a little stiffer and I like to know what the vehicle's necessarily thinking. So it was something that just stuck out to me. I also saw reviews that a lot of people complained about the brakes of the vehicle not being enough to handle the size of the vehicle, which definitely stuck out as being weird, just because this is a roughly 54 100-pound vehicle. So that's a pretty hefty vehicle inherently. But I've never really found the brakes to be insufficient or not enough for what you would need in general stopping. Maybe I have a little less risk tolerance than the average consumer or reviewer of this one, where if you adjust your expectations accordingly, this is a family sedan that the stereotype is probably Swedish grandmas are driving, or it's the soccer moms or just dads. It's not necessarily a sports car or a sports vehicle. So when you adjust your expectations correctly, or you adjust your expectations to that being the status quo, it's a good daily driver, or it just does what you would expect it to do. Sorry, I had to do that. It was locking me into, or I switched up and upshifted my gears a little bit ago, and it just was not taking that back over. But when you adjust your expectations accordingly and you just use it as a daily driver, a commuter, and something that is occasionally spirited or fun, it's definitely a completely adequate and good vehicle for that one. Then we can dive into it being a commuter. So this has an 8-speed transmission, and this being the T6 all-wheel drive trim means that this is a turbocharged engine, a supercharged engine, and it is a 4-cylinder. There is no electric engine, which would be on the T8, and then for the T5, it is just a turbocharged engine. I never actually I did drive a T6 prior to purchasing this from Lexus of Greenwood in Colorado. They did fantastic, but the vehicle was in a little rougher shape than I would prefer, as well as one of the engine mounts on it was already cracked. But I had also driven some of the turbo models, and I could not necessarily tell the difference in between my little bit of testing between these two vehicles, or between the two trim variations when I was doing it. Granted, they were not my vehicle when I was doing this, and I was test driving one from a CarMax and one from a Lexus dealership. I did not necessarily want to beat on the vehicle or do anything that was too hard on the vehicle, especially on a test drive, because if they're tracking the vehicle or anything like that, I obviously don't want to beat on or abuse it. I don't want to do anything to compromise the vehicle while I'm just test driving it, because that would be unfair to it, especially because when I was test driving them, I had no intention of buying when I was test driving, or I was not currently in the market for the vehicle. I was looking ahead for the future, but my vehicle had not been totaled yet. So that moves us on to how does this do as a commuter with the T6 engine? So the T6 engine definitely has enough torque as well as horsepower. It is 320 horsepower, I believe, with a lot more torque. So it does completely fine off the line to propel a family SUV to 0 to 60 in, 3.6, 4.2, something. I had looked into the numbers originally, but when it's just for the purpose, no, this is a 5 second, somewhere in the 5, 0 to 60. I think it might have been quicker than the TL. 5.2 sounds right. But it stopped mattering once I kind of considered what I was buying this vehicle for. This isn't my fun vehicle, or this isn't something where I'm taking it into canyon roads and just absolutely having a blast with it. I'm not turning track days with it. And for general commuting, general traffic, it does absolutely everything you would want it to do. You can absolutely go for a dig at a stoplight if you need to, and it'll be fine. You need to accelerate while merging into the highway or something else like that, you're going to be completely fine. But one of the, commonly said things in a lot of reviews that I didn't necessarily notice is they said the actuation of the supercharger was rough, or that a lot of people would feel it and it would just kind of like lug the engine necessarily. That is not something I necessarily notice whenever my supercharger does actuate, which its actuation point is, I believe, around 22 to 2400 RPM. But it never really seems to just like surge or ebb and flow in power. I found that the clutches for the supercharger engage relatively smoothly and seamlessly, and you can hear the supercharger whine, which is nice. You can also hear the release of the turbos. I don't necessarily ever have my music paused to see if I can hear the spool of the turbos, but the overall SPA platform for Volvo, I think it's relatively good, and I haven't had very many issues. I do know that the earlier models did have some issues with burning oil or burning coolant, but that was later revised in the piston rings, and I can't say that I have noticed any oil burn necessarily. So it is definitely something to be hesitant of when looking at the earlier years of the SPA platform vehicles, but you should be fine. Then when we look at kind of just the noise quality of the cabin, how well it's insulated, how well it's isolated, and overall sound deadening and dampening, we will just give you guys a little bit of clear audio playback for this portion of the drive, which is about 35 to 45 miles per hour on a mountain road in Golden, Colorado. Which, yeah, as you can hear, it's pretty adequate. I don't know if there's going to be any rattles from the camera that is recording me there, or if there's going to be any vibrations just from having the mic, how I have it laid out for this section of recording audio. But I will try and add a disclaimer if I do hear any of that during the audio review of this. Then, when we get into its just general, how is it to live with the Volvo XC90, or XC60, correction. So, for starters, I bought this vehicle just around its 50,000 mile mark. It was a one-owner vehicle from Texas, and it had sat in dealerships in St. Louis for quite a while. As for why that is, I'm not exactly sure. But when we purchased it, I drove it and road tripped it from St. Louis, Missouri to Denver, Colorado necessarily in one day, and that was kind of my first long-term road trip or long-term drive with this vehicle. It did absolutely adequate. Since then, I've thrown on about 5,000 more miles. It should be worth noting that it was down for about a month for just maintenance, but we will cover that one when we go to the running cost, operating cost of the vehicle, of which that will be covered after the driving portion of this video. But my overall MPG return throughout my ownership of the vehicle has been 23.9 to 24.2 miles per gallon. It depends on when we're considering the clock to start running. I reset one of my trip meters once I got to Colorado, or I reset my trip meter roughly when I started road tripping the vehicle, and one I had reset since I bought the car, where I just spent a lot of time sitting in traffic in St. Louis to get back because we bought it around rush hour, which rookie move. But 24, 23 miles per gallon is, actually pretty adequate, I would like to say, for when it comes to a 5,400-pound family SUV with a 4-cylinder engine that's being driven by a 23-year-old. I'm not necessarily the lightest on acceleration most of the time for my car, as well as it has been going through a transmission break-in period, which again we'll cover during running costs as well as reliability portion of the video. But it is just something to be aware of and hesitant of. So when we go to how does the vehicle handle, as you can see now, where there is a decent bit of twists and turns on this road, the suspension is definitely set up in a way where there's not a lot of body roll, which is definitely nice. One of the weird things that Volvo does is on a lot of their cars, there is a composite leaf spring in the rear, which is definitely just kind of unique or weird. I know that Corvettes did that for a little bit. I've not read into the engineering documentation as to why Volvo did that for some of the suspension setup, or if they just found through their research that it does something. But it's definitely interesting having a composite rear spring in a car in 2019, but this is 2023 now. Not sure if the newer Volvos with batteries have done that. When we jump into another common gripe that came and popped up in the reviews and a lot of information regarding this video, it's that the Sensus Entertainment, or the center screen itself, has a lot of issues and it's buggy. Maybe it was earlier reviews, and since it's had 4 years to develop, 5 years to develop, even though they've switched to a Google-based system now, I've never really had an issue with the infotainment. Primarily what I'll do is I will use Bluetooth audio instead of plugging in my phone. I do wish it had wireless CarPlay, but just occasionally it will stutter, pause my music for a few seconds and then return. But that's neither here nor there. I don't think I've ever had to hard reset the infotainment in my car. And I think it's only had one notable glitch or instance where it just acted weird, which was when I was using the mapping software. I tried to do a weird zoom as well as another action at the same time, and it just kind of froze and glitched out the screen. But even then, it was just for the mapping software, and I could still use the rest of the infotainment fine. The mapping software itself just wasn't necessarily happy. That's whatever in the end of the day. So now that we're back from a, pretty decent mountain drive, the only thing left to, discuss regarding this is, running cost, reliability, and other ownership thoughts that might be important to note. So when it comes to insurance cost, it is definitely not cheap to insure. Considering I'm 23, I think it was $240. It's, relatively high. I think it's up there for insurance for me. It is cheaper than some of the alternative options. There was not really an insurance cost change in between the various engines for this one, which is nice, as well as the safety features, the theft recovery, and a few other stuff helps to bring down those insurance prices, as well as probably the history of the vehicle does help it be a little cheaper to insure, just because I do believe some of the markers for it is the frequency of accident, the severity of accident, the value that the vehicle holds, and a few other things. I think those are relatively Good for the Volvo XC60, so that does help out on the insurance front for that. But when we move into the reliability and ownership experience, it has been definitely a mixed bag. Because, 24 miles per gallon, we can call it, of premium fuel at about $3 a gallon. It's not necessarily bad. It's pretty good for fuel cost, especially compared to the 2008 TL, because I was getting about the same gas mileage or worse, probably worse, with a smaller tank. So I was just filling up a lot more often, and I wasn't living in Colorado for most of my ownership with that vehicle, so it was just cheaper to replenish and fill. Then we go into the reliability and dealership experience. So I don't know if I just got spoiled having an Acura, where I could go to Acura dealerships, I could go to Honda dealerships for most of my maintenance, or if it's just a relatively niche location where, being in Denver, Colorado, I've got 3 or 4 viable Volvo dealerships, but when it comes to scheduling maintenance and how quickly I can get into maintenance, a lot of these are like 2, 3, 4 weeks out, if not even further past that one. Like when I needed to get a new battery or a software update, I had to schedule like 3, 4 weeks in advance. I wasn't necessarily used to that with owning a Honda or owning an Acura. It was like, yeah, we can get you in like a week. We can get you in like 2 days. So I don't know if that's a circumstance of the dealerships being bogged down with other issues, if it's just a locational issue where it's just the dealerships in this area, the service experience is lackluster, or if that's a universal Volvo issue. It is what it is. When it comes to reliability, there's only been a few different items on it, or running expenses. So my first running expense was about $2,600 for tires, give or take somewhere around there. So when I had purchased the car, or we started the purchasing process of the car, during my dad's test drive of it, it got a nail in the shoulder of the tire that was already on it. So that it was deemed unrepairable for the nail in the shoulder. However, that put the remaining 4 tires at below half of their life left. So it was either replace 1 tire with a half-used tire and have to buy down the line, which they were like, they were not good tires necessarily, or buy new tires. So I bought 4 brand new Michelin Cross Climate 2s in a 21-inch size, and I think it was like $400 to $550 per tire. It was about $2,100 to mount, balance, and get the tires installed, as well as buy the tires. And then it was about $400 to $500. No, it might have been $200 to send it into a Volvo dealership in St. Louis to recalibrate lane keep assist and a lot of the other safety features, just because they warned that changing out the tires and messing with that stuff might affect that system. So to go ahead and recalibrate it. Also, not knowing the history of the vehicle, we just went ahead and recalibrated it. So with tax and everything around that, it took us to around $2,500. Not that bad. The tires have been great, and that has also been represented in the vehicle's ability to handle and work in snow. It has Haldex all-wheel drive, which means it engages it when it senses slip or something like that, and engages relatively quickly. Wow, there goes my mic, but we're just going to go ahead and freehand this one now. So if you're going around a corner, you're going around a turn, sometimes you will feel the back end start to kick out. It will go ahead and extend or slide out, and then you can actually feel the all-wheel drive engage, where it just straightens it out. That only happens in a few rare instances, and then from that, generally it does pretty good at actually beating the reaction time to where the all-wheel drive is engaged prior to you actually being in a situation that you would need it, because the reaction time is relatively quickly. So that's just something worthwhile or worth noting. So then we can go into my next round of issues, which is when we bought the car, one of the concerns was it was initially a Texas car. So making sure that the battery had enough cold cranking amps, as well as the age of the battery. It was the one that the vehicle was produced with. I think the manufacturing date of the battery was 2018. and I bought the car in 2023, so the battery was on its way out. There was check engine light issues actually around the time that, you know, I was looking to replace the battery. So initially I thought it was low voltage causing the issues. It turns out it was not. And so it went to scheduling that with Steel Tar Volvo up north of Denver area, just because it seemed like they were going to be a good and relatively, it was the quickest appointment I could get to get the battery. But I have gone back to them for maintenance and other stuff. So initially we just got my battery changed out and new front windshield wipers, just because needed to do it, prepping for winter. And then the check engine light came back on afterwards, or started appearing after that one. So we were like, huh, turns out that's not the issue. Take it back to Steel Tar. They go ahead and run some analysis. I got a loaner car, which was a 2024 Volvo XC60 in the T5 or B5, I think is what it was rebranded into. And they're doing their analysis and they go, hey, it's just a software update. There's a service bulletin posted on that one. It was relatively cheap to go ahead and update the software. It was $450, maybe up to $1,000 to go ahead and do a software update over a weekend. Get to drive the loaner car for a little bit and just have them go ahead and run some additional diagnosis and make sure everything else is good. And see at the service bulletin update for the software, fixed everything. It also did some additional minor tunes. And then from there, we're all good, right? Well, I think it was like two weeks later, maybe a week later, I'm going to go ahead and go get a haircut. I'm merging on to the interstate, and I get this little warning on my dash. It's like a little picture of a turtle, and it just goes limp mode engaged, transmission performance reduced or engine performance reduced, and it just like dumps my RPMs where I'm like at like, for some reason, like 2,000 RPM. It just dumps it to like 5,000 RPM and then dumps back down. And I just had to limp the car off of the highway onto the next exit. And from there, you know, go through the regular thing of power cycling the car. It cleared the fault. Tried to go ahead and drive it. Got like a quarter mile maybe. Boom. Transmission performance reduced. Another limp mode. Go ahead. Just keep limping it forward into this little neighborhood. Call Volvo and go, hey guys, this is my issue. They go ahead and power cycle the car. If that doesn't work, you'll probably need to take it in. So went ahead, power cycled it. Yeah, no, issue pretty much immediately returned. I asked them, because I don't live too far from one of the dealerships, I was like, hey, can I limp this thing into there? Or, you know, what's the soonest I could get an appointment? All of them were quoting me for over a month out, which, you know, unfortunately timed, and they were like, hey, we don't advise driving the vehicle past this one. We would recommend towing it into a dealership. So I went ahead and scheduled appointments with all of the dealerships in my area, or at least like 2 or 3 of them, and asked them, hey, if there's an opening or someone cancels, please let me know. I will get this vehicle towed here. Volvo did cover the tow charge, but I had a rental vehicle for the month that my Volvo was down. That cost me around $2,100, just because there was the rental cost, and I'm also under the age of 25, so there was an additional charge for me being underage, of which this vehicle does have a warranty through an outside company. They declined to pay most of the charges for that one. They wanted to pay $300. They have stiffed me. They have not responded when I sent them the receipts, so I don't think I'm ever getting that money back. Then, you know, vehicle gets towed to Volvo. What was it? McDonald Volvo, I think? No, Rickenbaugh Volvo in Denver, Colorado. It's down for a few days. They did get it in early, which is nice. It went in right around Christmas time or something like that. And they're doing their analysis, and they're like, hey, bad news here. We can either try and clear this transmission fault, driving around and see what happens. They did that immediately, comes back on, and they go, deeper dive here. We're going to need to replace the transmission, of which that was all in for transmission replacement, transmission installation for parts, labor, everything associated like that. It was around $11,000. So almost 50% the value of the car from when I bought it, just into the transmission. But I want to say thank you to Volvo, Rickenbaugh Volvo in this case, and especially Volvo for how it did. So my warranty company originally said, hey, we will source a transmission probably from a junkyard, and that's what you'll use for it. That is what we will cover. Volvo, at least my service advisor and my dealership, really stuck their neck out for me. They fought the warranty company for as much as they could. They got the warranty company to cover 100% of the maintenance of this. They got the warranty company to cover as much as it would cost to source whatever transmission they wanted, and that Volvo was going to use a new OEM transmission from Aisin because it was the shifting computer or something. One of the whatever tells the transmission itself to actuate, or the actuation method within the transmission for it to switch gears, died. I also lost 5th gear and 6th gear. So that happened prematurely, but Volvo said, hey, we cannot comfortably say that we want to send you out in a transmission we don't know the history of, that's being sourced from an outside dealership, and we don't take outside sourced parts that, you know, would just be questionable or we can't guarantee the safety and the health of. Thank you, Volvo, for doing that one. So I paid the differential cost in between a used transmission and a new transmission. I paid that portion out of pocket, which was around $4,000, which I would have loved for the warranty company to pay for because the dealership was not comfortable, using the parts that they wanted to source, which I 100% understand. I wouldn't feel comfortable using a part that you don't know anything about. But, so we're going through that one. I got my new transmission at 54,000 miles, and I've put about 2,500 miles onto it since then, and it has slowly been breaking in. But in total, if you were keeping numbers, that puts my total maintenance cost on the Volvo XC60 to $14,000, $15,000 probably. On top of that, if you count in the loaner car, that puts it to $16,000, $17,000 on a car that I paid mid to high 20s on. So, questionable thing. This warranty's not really paying off, but questionable like that. And the car has been down for probably a month and a week or a month and a half now at this point. In total, for time that it was at the dealership, it was undrivable because of the transmission fault. But when it comes to the transmission fault, I don't know if I would blame Volvo for that one. It might have been the previous owner really beat on it, skipped maintenance, or there's some other underlying issues. Something could have shorted. Done that one. It's also not a Volvo design transmission, it's actually an Aisin transmission. So, yeah, it might have just been a quiescent failure with no real identifiable cause, but now my transmission is breaking in pretty nicely. It shifts a lot better than when I initially picked up the car, and stuff is a lot smoother. My engine was not damaged, it seems, through the failure of my transmission. Everything feels fine. Really, I just wish that dealership experience might be quicker to schedule service as well as to get loaner vehicles for something that is considered a premium brand. It has been pretty hard to get a loaner vehicle or to get loaner coverage during that one. Granted, I get that not everywhere does it, and since I'm not a lease vehicle or a under Volvo warranty vehicle, it is a little harder in terms of priority for me to get a loaner vehicle, but it would be a great perk to have. And Volvo has handled and done everything very well when it comes to my interactions with them. So for that, I would say that I recommend a Volvo through that aspect. And right now, it's difficult to say what the long-term reliability is going to be for the Volvo. Maybe now it has gotten all of the bugs and issues ironed out of it, and it'll be smooth sailing from here. Maybe we'll have an 8-month update where something catastrophically fails. Maybe we'll have a 1-year update where everything's great, but we'll see how it is. This is 6,000 miles in review and about 6 to 8 months of ownership, It has been expensive so far, but hopefully it gets better from here. If you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, please drop them in the comments down below. Feel free to subscribe if you like the video, drop a like. But with that being said, hope you guys have a great day. Thank you for listening.